When my father toasted, "To the one who earned it," pointing at my brother at his retirement party, I stood and projected the scanned amendment my grandfather left that shifted the estate to me, and the applause died into a dozen silent phone calls. I, 34 am, never thought I'd be the villain in my own family story, but that's exactly what happened the night I decided enough was enough. My grandfather died when I was 16. He was a self-made man who built a construction company from nothing in the 70s, turned it into something worth millions, and then watched my father run it into mediocrity through laziness and poor decisions. But Grandpa was smart. He knew exactly who his son was, and more importantly, he knew who his grandsons were. Growing up, I spent every summer working alongside Grandpa, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand what he built. My brother, 3 years older, spent those same summers partying at the lake house Dad bought with company profits. When I was covered in sawdust and learning to read blueprints, my brother was perfecting his golf swing and charm offensive. Dad always called him the natural leader, the face of the family, the golden boy who would take us into the future. I was just the weird kid who preferred ledgers to people. After Grandpa's funeral, Dad gathered us in the lawyer's office. The will was read, and everything seemed straightforward. The estate, the company, the properties, all of it went into a trust controlled by my father until his retirement, at which point it would transfer to my brother as the eldest son. Standard primogeniture bullshit that Dad loved because it validated his favorite. I was 21 and finishing my business degree when Dad made his first major move. He announced that my brother would be VP of operations despite having zero experience and a bachelor's degree in communications he barely earned. I had already been working in the company for 3 years, climbing from the ground up, learning every department. When I suggested I might be ready for a junior management position, Dad laughed and said I needed to learn people skills first. My brother lasted 8 months as VP before Dad had to quietly shuffle him to a consultancy role, which meant he got paid to show up at client dinners and schmooze. Meanwhile, I was restructuring our failing supply chain and saving the company hundreds of thousands in wasted overhead. The next 15 years followed the same pattern. I pulled the company back from the edge of irrelevance 3 separate times. I modernized our systems, brought us into the digital age, secured contracts Dad's old boy network could never touch. And every single time I succeeded, Dad would publicly credit my brother's leadership or vision or strategic thinking. By the time I hit 30, I had stopped expecting recognition. I just focused on the work because someone had to, and because I knew Grandpa would have wanted the company to survive. I got married to someone who understood my dedication, had 2 kids, and built a quiet life separate from the family drama. But my brother never stopped being the golden child. He married into money, had 3 picture-perfect kids, and somehow convinced everyone he was carrying the family legacy despite doing absolutely nothing but showing up. Dad worshipped him. Family gatherings became showcases for my brother's latest achievement, a hole-in-one, a charity board position, a quote in the local business journal that I had actually secured for the company, but that he delivered because he was the face people knew. 2 months ago, Dad announced his retirement party. 65th birthday. End of an era, passing the torch. The invitations went out to everyone who mattered in our industry and our city. 300 guests at the country club, open bar, live band, the works. And in smaller, private conversations, Dad made it clear this was when my brother would officially take over everything. I had known this was coming for years. The will was clear, but something had been eating at me for months, a memory I couldn't quite place. I kept thinking about Grandpa's last year, about how he had called me into his study one afternoon when Dad was out of town, how he had seemed sad but also determined, how he had asked me about my plans for the company, really listened to my ideas, and then told me something I had almost forgotten. He said that blood doesn't determine worth, and that hard work should always be rewarded over birthright. A week before the retirement party, I did something I probably should have done years ago. I went to the lawyer who had handled Grandpa's estate. He was old now, semi-retired, but still kept his files. I asked him if there had been any amendments or codicils to the will after the initial reading. The old man looked at me for a long moment, then asked why I was asking now. I told him the truth. I had a feeling Grandpa wouldn't have left everything to chance, knowing who my father was and who my brother was. The lawyer sighed, went into his back office, and returned with a sealed envelope. Inside was a document dated 3 months before Grandpa died. A formal amendment to his will, properly witnessed and notarized, that changed everything. The amendment stated that while the estate would go into the trust controlled by my father, there was a performance clause attached to the final distribution. Upon Dad's retirement, the estate would be evaluated based on who had contributed most substantially to the company's success, growth, and sustainability over the preceding 15 years. Supporting documentation included quarterly reports, financial records, client testimonials, and operational improvements. There was a 3-person panel designated to review this evidence: Grandpa's lawyer, his accountant, and an independent business consultant. Their decision would be final and binding. And according to the document, this review had been conducted 6 months ago, quietly, as specified. The panel had reached a unanimous decision, signed and sealed. The estate, including the company, properties, and controlling interest in all family holdings, would transfer to me, not my brother. My hands shook as I read it. The lawyer explained that he had tried to contact me multiple times over the years to discuss this, but Dad had always intercepted communications, insisting he would handle family business matters. He had assumed I knew about the amendment because surely my father would have disclosed it. But Dad never had. Because Dad never knew. Grandpa had deliberately kept this clause quiet in the initial will reading, with instructions that the amendment only be revealed if someone asked the right questions or when the time came for distribution. He had trusted that the truth would emerge when it needed to. I spent the next week in a haze of anger and vindication. 15 years of being overlooked, dismissed, patronized, all while Grandpa had actually seen me, had actually valued what I contributed. But he had also set up a test, maybe for me, maybe for all of us. He wanted to see if I would fight for what I earned or if I would just accept being overshadowed. I made copies of everything: the amendment, the panel's decision, the supporting documentation that laid out in stark terms exactly who had built what. Then I made a decision that I knew would detonate my family like a bomb. I would wait until the retirement party. The night of the party was perfect. Warm spring evening. Everyone in formal wear, champagne flowing. Dad was in his element, holding court with industry veterans and city officials. My brother stood beside him like a prince waiting for his coronation, accepting congratulations for an inheritance he hadn't earned. My wife knew what I was planning. She had tried to talk me out of it, suggesting I handle this privately, through lawyers, without the spectacle. But I had spent 15 years watching my father publicly diminish me while elevating my brother. If this was going to happen, it would happen the same way. Publicly. The dinner was typical: speeches from old colleagues, stories about Dad's career, carefully curated memories that painted him as a titan of industry rather than the man who coasted on his father's legacy. My brother gave a toast that brought people to tears, talking about carrying forward the family tradition and honoring both Grandpa's and Dad's vision. I sat at my assigned table in the back and waited. Finally, the moment came. Dad stood for his closing remarks, emotional and dramatic. He talked about legacy and family, about the pride of watching his sons grow, about the future of the company. Then he raised his glass and turned to my brother. The toast was simple and devastating: to the one who earned it. He pointed directly at my brother as he said it, and the room erupted in applause. My brother stood, beaming, soaking in recognition for work I had done. Dad embraced him, and people were already pulling out phones to document the moment for social media. I stood up. The movement caught Dad's attention. He looked at me, probably expecting me to join in the applause, to play my role as the supporting brother one more time. Instead, I walked to the front of the room where the AV equipment had been set up for the photo slideshow. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the projector, and put the first document on the screen behind Dad and my brother. It was the amendment to Grandpa's will, blown up large enough for everyone to read. The applause died like someone had cut the power. Dad's face went from confusion to recognition to something approaching horror. My brother just looked lost, staring at the words but not understanding them yet. I didn't make a speech. I just changed the slides. The panel's decision letter. The performance metrics showing my contributions versus my brother's over 15 years. The financial records proving who had saved the company and who had nearly bankrupted it. The client testimonials naming me specifically as the reason they stayed with us. Each slide was another nail in the coffin of the narrative Dad had built. People in the audience were pulling out their phones, not to celebrate anymore, but to call lawyers, accountants, business partners. The implications were hitting them faster than they were hitting my family. Dad finally found his voice and told me to stop, that this wasn't the time or place. I looked at him and said that he had chosen the time and place when he made that toast. That Grandpa had known exactly who earned what, and that he had built in protections to make sure the truth came out eventually. My brother tried to speak, but what could he say? Everything on that screen was documented fact. He hadn't earned anything except Dad's favoritism. I projected the final slide. The legal transfer documents, signed by the panel and the estate lawyer, officially granting me controlling interest in the estate effective immediately upon Dad's retirement, which, according to his own announcement tonight, was effective tomorrow. Then I disconnected my phone, nodded to my wife, and walked out. The silence behind me was deafening. Update 1. The fallout was nuclear. Within an hour of leaving the party, my phone was flooded with calls. Dad, my brother, aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends. Everyone wanted to know what the hell I had just done. I ignored all of them except the estate lawyer, who confirmed that everything I had presented was legally sound and enforceable. Dad showed up at my house at midnight. My wife answered the door and told him I wouldn't speak to him without my own lawyer present. He tried to push past her, actually pushed past her, until I came downstairs and told him to leave or I would call the police. He screamed at me for being ungrateful, for humiliating him, for destroying the family. He said Grandpa would be ashamed of the way I handled this. I asked him which part Grandpa would be ashamed of, the part where I worked my ass off for 15 years, or the part where I finally showed everyone the truth Dad had hidden. He didn't have an answer for that. He just kept saying I should have come to him privately, that we could have worked something out. But we both knew that was a lie. If I had approached him privately, he would have buried it, found some legal loophole, convinced me to accept some token position while still giving everything to my brother. The only reason he wanted privacy was to maintain control of the narrative. My brother's response was different. He called me once, and his voice was empty. He said he never knew about the amendment, that Dad had always told him the estate was his, that he had made life plans based on that assumption. He said I had humiliated him in front of everyone who mattered. I told him he had accepted credit for my work for 15 years without question, and if he felt humiliated now, imagine how I felt every single time Dad praised him for something I had done. He hung up. The business community response was swift. By Monday morning, I had 3 major clients call to congratulate me on taking over and to express relief that someone competent would be running things. 2 of them admitted they had been considering leaving because they were tired of dealing with my brother's incompetence. One literally said he had only stayed out of respect for my grandfather and because he knew I was the one actually managing operations. Dad tried to rally support among the board of directors, but half of them had been at the party. They had seen the documentation. They knew the truth. An emergency board meeting was called, and Dad attempted to challenge the estate transfer on procedural grounds. The lawyer shut that down in about 10 minutes with the paper trail, showing everything had been done properly. The vote to confirm me as CEO was 8-2, with only Dad and one of his old golf buddies dissenting. My brother withdrew from the company entirely. He released a statement saying he was focusing on other ventures and wishing the company success. In reality, his wife's family was furious that the expected inheritance had evaporated, and their marriage was already showing cracks. Dad was forced into actual retirement rather than the advisor role he had planned to maintain. He tried to make one last power play by threatening to contest the will in court, but his own lawyer told him he had no grounds and would lose spectacularly while racking up legal fees. Within 3 weeks, the dust had settled into a new reality. I was running the company my grandfather built. The estate was mine, and my entire family had fractured into camps, those who thought I was justified and those who thought I was a vindictive asshole who destroyed a family over money. Update 2. It's been 3 months since the retirement party. The company is thriving. Freed from having to manage around my brother's incompetence and Dad's ego, I've been able to implement changes that were overdue for years. We've expanded into 2 new markets, secured a major municipal contract that will keep us busy for 5 years, and our profit margins are the best they've been since Grandpa ran things. The cost has been my family. Dad hasn't spoken to me since the board meeting. He put his personal house on the market. Turns out he had been counting on estate income to maintain his lifestyle, and without it, he can't afford the property taxes. My mother is caught in the middle, trying to maintain relationships with both her sons while dealing with Dad's bitterness. She calls me sometimes, usually after a few glasses of wine, and asks why I couldn't have just let it go. I remind her that letting it go would have meant watching everything Grandpa built crumble under my brother's leadership, while I lived with the knowledge that I could have saved it, but didn't. My brother moved to another state. His marriage did fall apart, and he's living in a condo his in-laws are subsidizing while he figures out what to do with a life that was supposed to be handed to him. Part of me feels bad for him. He was raised to believe he deserved this, and that's on Dad more than him. But another part of me remembers every time he accepted praise for my work without correction, every time he benefited from my effort without acknowledgement. The extended family mostly chose sides based on who benefited from the old arrangement. The relatives who were expecting favors from my brother's generosity think I'm a monster. The ones who actually work for a living and understand merit tend to support what I did. I ran into one of Dad's old business partners at a Chamber of Commerce event last month. He pulled me aside and told me that Grandpa had confided in him about the amendment years ago. He said Grandpa had been conflicted about it, worried it would tear the family apart, but more worried about what would happen to his life's work if he didn't protect it. Grandpa had apparently said that he hoped I would be strong enough to claim what I earned, but kind enough to handle it with grace. I'm not sure I handled it with grace, but I handled it with truth. The retirement party video went viral in local business circles, not because anyone recorded my presentation, but because enough people were there and talked about it that it became legend. I'm either the hero who stood up to family nepotism or the villain who humiliated his father and brother for greed, depending on who's telling the story. My wife asked me last week if I regretted the way I did it, if I wished I had handled it privately instead of making it a public spectacle. I thought about it for a long time before answering. No, because privacy would have meant letting Dad control the narrative one more time. It would have meant quiet legal battles where he could spin stories about ungrateful sons and family betrayal without the truth being visible. It would have meant my brother could continue pretending he earned what he was given. Grandpa left me the amendment because he knew the truth would matter. But he also knew I would have to be strong enough to reveal it, to fight for it, to defend it against everyone who preferred the comfortable lie. The night of the party, when I stood up and connected my phone to that projector, I made a choice. Not just about the estate or the company, but about who I was going to be. The quiet supporter who enabled mediocrity for the sake of peace, or the person willing to burn bridges to honor the truth. I chose the fire. My grandfather built something meaningful from nothing. He did it through hard work, sacrifice, and refusing to accept limitations. Then he watched his son squander it through laziness and favoritism. So he built in a safeguard, a test, a final lesson. He taught me that sometimes the right thing and the easy thing are opposites, and that legacy isn't about blood, it's about who's willing to earn it. I think about that toast a lot. To the one who earned it. Dad meant it for my brother, but in the end, Grandpa had already answered that question 15 years earlier. He just waited to see if I was strong enough to claim the answer. I was. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.